Hello, lovely humans. It's so lovely to see you here today. Thank you all so much for taking the time. If you haven't already, do pop in the chat feature where you're watching from, because we've got lovely folks like Neil, who says that intro is getting better and better. We've got Melissa, who's saying howdy from Houston, Texas. We've got folks, Hannah from Essex. We've got Andy from Sheffield. We've got Lauren rightly pointing out that I was bopping in the corner to the intro music. We're having a lot of fun, so thank you for taking the time today. If you haven't already, do change your chat feature to everyone, so everyone can see where you're popping in from, just like Louise has from Sheffield and Jenny has in Maidenhead. The instructions to do that are on your screen right now. You just need to head to your chat feature and switch a toggle, which goes from host and panelist to everyone, and we'll have a great time together today. Today we have an absolute legend joining us today in Daniel Priestley. You may know him from books like Key Person of Influence, from his personal brand on LinkedIn, where his videos are just smashing it, where he's like properly shares some directive business content. I'd really recommend checking it out. That's where the QR code goes. Or indeed through his appearance on podcasts like Diary of a CEO, which was ringing in my ears this morning as I was preparing for today's session. However you know him, Daniel's a force of entrepreneurialism, and I think we can learn a lot from him today. He's someone who I think we can learn a lot in a very specific direction as well, which is someone who I think sits very neatly between the lines between sales, marketing, and entrepreneurialism. So I really hope we can gain an awful lot from him today. We've got folks tuning in from Morocco to Toaster. This is the phenomenal stuff that comes from the Marketing Meetup. So thank you all so much for being here today. Before we get going with today's session, I've got to say a big thank you to our sponsors. And this week's featured sponsor is a company called Frontify. Now, Frontify enable you to bring all of your digital brand assets into a place which is super searchable and easy, which helps you solve the problem that, like, if you've ever experienced someone in your sales team using the wrong pitch deck, whether you've seen someone using your logo wrong, whatever it may be, Frontify help do that. They've just released a really fun brand quiz where you can head into this, find 50 brands on this quiz in 5 minutes. It's really great, so worth checking out. Also, a big thank you to Exclaimer, Cambridge Marketing College, Planable, Redgate, ScoreApp, from who Daniel is representing today, and Storyblock. We speak about each of these brands in more detail on rotation as the weeks go by, so we'll speak about those in more detail as well as in your before and after email from today's session. With all that said, now's the time to get going with the man, the myth, the legend of Daniel Priestley, with the people, the myths, the legends that are the Marketing Meetup community. So Daniel, mate, thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate you being here.
Joe, it's lovely. We saw each other in Jersey and really just kind of immediately connected and thought we've got plenty to talk about. So I'm looking forward to it.
Lots of watches and guitar stuff, so, and children as well.
And kids.
Yeah, and kids. So let's get going with the first question, which is, like, we've already identified your sort of like passion for entrepreneurialism, and you speak really well on this. But as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, someone who's built a lot of businesses, how do you start to build a strategy for these organizations? And the reason why I think this is important is that as marketers, we play a part in the strategic delivery for our organization, but that's usually set up the top by someone who's founded a business or entrepreneur. So how do you start to build a strategy from a business level for the businesses that you've created?
Yeah, so over the last 22 years, I've had 7 startups that went from 0 to 1 million in the first 12 months, and I've had 3 businesses that have gone over 10 million. They're all my own businesses. So even though those are relatively small numbers, if you work in corporate, these are all private companies, mostly unfunded businesses that I've bootstrapped or used credit cards to grow. So I'm very much the entrepreneur, growth orientated person. I've never had a proper job. Um, I've delivered pizzas and worked at McDonald's, but other than that, I'm an entrepreneur right from 21 years old. And there's a few key things that I think about strategically. The first thing that I always think about is the concept of becoming oversubscribed, that a business becomes profitable and it grows when demand outstrips supply. And this is something that you learn on day one of an economics course, that demand and supply set the price and demand and supply set the profitability. If we were in a terrible economy, that the economy was tanking, and you turn on the news and it just says the economy is just through the floor, it's the worst it's ever been. If you drove past a restaurant and there was a queue up out the front with people waiting to get into that restaurant, the economy is suddenly irrelevant. It's like, well,
Mhm,
that restaurant's probably extremely profitable.
mhm.
Um, if you had a business coach that had a 3 month waiting list, the economy is pretty irrelevant. On the flip side, if you were to hear on the news that the economy is booming and that everything's just awesome, but you've got no clients booked in for the next 2 or 3 months,
Mhm.
you post on social media and it's crickets, you run an ad and no one clicks it. It doesn't really matter that the economy is booming. Your economy is not going to be booming. So this first idea is this idea of demand and supply tension. Now, this is also quite confusing because in a digital world, there's theoretically no tension. So let's take a product like Google Maps. Even though Google Maps requires $1 billion worth of satellites to orbit the Earth, and it requires, billions of dollars worth of data servers to make Google Maps work for everybody, there's actually no limitation as to how many Google Map searches can be done every minute.
For sure.
So therefore, the prices goes to zero. There's no tension, so prices are zero. They have to figure out another way to monetize. Um, so it's important to start with these basics, that demand and supply tension is really the fundamental bedrock. What you're trying to achieve as a marketer is an imbalance where there are more people who want something than can actually have it. I know that's a weird thing to think about, but that's kind of you're actually trying to get to a situation where some people who want something and would have paid for it miss out.
Nice. That's fascinating. And I don't, obviously you've spoken about this in your books and stuff like that, but I don't think I hear a lot of people speak about that, probably because of the digital age that we live in. So to try and create that tension, not just as a marketing mechanism where some people may speak about this idea of scarcity, but actually to have that as a fundamental bedrock of business strategy, is fascinating to me. I don't think I've really heard many people verbalize it that way before. So thank you. Like we've got James in the chat saying, love this, so true already, so you got some validation from the community as well today. Um, this kind of this kind of leads us in, so you're the best kind of guest because we have a combination of questions today, and then we've got some slides as well. So, like, could you speak us through your 3-part year? Because I think this sort of leads into the idea of being oversubscribed.
Yeah, so the philosophy is get oversubscribed, and then the tactical implementation as to how I've done this reliably for 20 years is called the 3-part year. So the 3-part year is, and it's actually great that we're talking about this as we're entering 2025, because my entire I currently head up a group of 8 different companies. All of the companies are going through the process of planning their 3-part year for the year ahead. So they're actually thinking through what will their 3-part year look like. So the 3-part year is essentially looking at a year ahead, and we want 3 key things to be present. Would it be okay to bring up a slide that shows these?
Of
And I'll talk
course.
it through for anyone who's listening just on audio, but let's go here. So the 3-part year is essentially this. Part one is we want to have a big message that we have as our main message for the year. So, for example, I've got a publishing company that I own, and the big message that we have is the book that changes your life is not one you read, it's one that you write. And that writing a book will change your life more than reading a book. So that's one of our big messages, and we essentially explore that in all directions, and we explore that in many different ways. When it comes to Score App, we have software that does lead generation and basically creates campaigns, marketing campaigns for small businesses. And the big message is everything is downstream from lead generation. If you get lead generation right, you can fix all the other problems. But if you can't get lead generation right, then all the other problems don't really matter until you get the leads coming in. So we talk about this idea of everything's downstream from lead generation. One of my other businesses is a business called Dent Accelerators. We run business accelerator programs. And the big message is until you're a key person of influence in the industry that you love, your full-time job is to become one. So we explore that in all of its glory. So we basically have this central big message, and the goal is to have a big message for the year. The second thing that we do is a quarterly spotlight campaign. So a quarterly spotlight campaign is all about doing something different, exciting, fresh, nuanced, providing variety, having different kind of speakers, new products that are being launched. It's the something new is happening every 90 days. And it doesn't have to be, that you reinvent the business. It just could be that you've got an interesting new speaker who's going to be speaking, or it could be that you're doing a new brand partnership or something. But something exciting needs to be happening every 90 days to re-engage people. And then the one that pays the bills, the third part that actually pays the bills, that does most of revenue, is the boring part, and it's called the perfect repeatable week. And the perfect repeatable week is what we do is we architect a perfect week where we do the same stuff over and over and over and over. In my first business, 20 something years ago, our perfect repeatable week was every Sunday we took out a quarter-page ad that generated sales leads. Every Wednesday, we had an introduction workshop that we did where we invited people to come to an introduction workshop, a physical live event workshop. And then we followed up with the leads. And we actually repeated this 43 times that year. And we went from 0 to 1.3 million in the first year with 400,000 of profit. But we pretty much did the exact same week 43 times. And then we scaled that business. In year 3, we opened up in 3 cities. And we did 173 introduction events across the 3 cities, and we did 10.7 million of revenue. And essentially, it was rinse, repeat, crank the handle, repeat, repeat, repeat. If you think about a big band like Coldplay, they use the same marketing in various cities, and they just tour the same show, and every show has the same hits that they play. They have the same like magic trick around the like flashy lighty thing that they put on your wrist. They do the same pyrotechnics, and the same jokes. And they just go from city to city, and they do 2 or 3 cities a week, and they do a perfect repeatable week. So even something that looks cool like Coldplay, they're just executing a perfect repeatable week that they rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. So what we want to do is we want to architect a perfect repeatable week and just go throughout the year. And then 4 exciting campaigns that are the spotlights, and then 1 big message that is the cloud cover on social media.
I love that. That's just wicked. I mean, like, thank you, because I think the clarity that comes from that. It obviously, we've got Lucy in the chat who says we'll have to agree to disagree on Coldplay, but I think that's more about musical choices than
Metallica does the same. If Metallica is your thing, then we can use the Metallica example.
Yeah. I love that. I've got one question, and then Celia in the chat has made a really great point here. So today's webinar, we were speaking about the intersection between business, marketing, and sales when it comes to sort of creating great relations and understanding how we can all work together really well. And it strikes me that with the model that you've just presented, you've also got quite a clear mindset in terms of who has responsibility for what and who's doing what kind of activity. That being said, I'd love to broaden this question out and just sort of say, in your mind, how do you differentiate the responsibilities between sort of business, sales, and marketing, and how they can work best together? Because I read a stat yesterday that like 38% of companies sort of identify solo departments as one of the worst challenges they face right now. So from your perspective as an entrepreneur, as a business builder, how do you start to work that through?
As an entrepreneur, the job of the marketing department is to create warm leads for the sales team. And I'm a really big believer that marketing has to show up as sales. The best brand building campaign is owning the product. So I've got a Mont Blanc pen here in front of me that was a gift from a friend, right? So the best way for me to have a Mont Blanc brand experience is that someone has given me the Mont Blanc and now I've got it and I'm riding with it and I enjoy it. And every day I'm seeing that little logo. So the best brand campaign is ownership. The best brand campaign for BMW is staring at the BMW logo on your steering wheel because you bought the damn thing.
Mhm.
So so I'm a big believer that, what are we trying to do as marketers? We're trying to create conversion opportunities. We're trying to build up to a conversion, whether that be a digital, conversion on a landing page, or whether in many cases it involves a salesperson, or some sort of back and forwards with a customer success person or something like that. But we're trying to get people ready for conversion.
Love that. And so there was a quote earlier which I loved you saying, which is all of business and life is a team sport, and I think that's like just such a lovely thing. And like it was warming. But where have you seen folks go wrong with this? Because this interaction, in what you've just described, you've had a lot of business experience, and so you've got a wider context than a lot of folks, including myself on this call, will have. Where have you seen a tension point between these departments that you've had to overcome or rectify to get to a good place? Because presumably it does happen.
Yeah, the biggest tension point is what I'd call hiding out. Looking good, going nowhere. Looking good, going nowhere is where you say all the right things and you've got the right philosophies and you've kind of like, you want to create a nice looking brand and you want to tick all the boxes. But the level of intensity around growing the business and scaling the business, there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect that we're here to have fun, we're here to build a great brand, and the way that we measure the scoreboard is that the business scales. That we're pretty excited that we're building a great product. By the way, I more broadly, everything in the business is marketing. Like even the accounts department is marketing, and the product is marketing, and the way that we look after our customers long term is marketing. But if I kind of zoom into that front end marketing, the growth marketing, the scaling, that's this. But the biggest disconnect is this idea that we we sit around looking good, but you know, we're not actually going anywhere. The beautiful thing about a startup is that you can be scrappy as hell, and if
Mm.
you're getting the result, that's fine.
Yeah, love that. So we've got Celia in the chat who's saying, looking good and going nowhere. I'm stealing this, we'll frame it and send it off as a Christmas gift, which is
Yeah.
really lovely. I actually want to bring us back to one of Celia's points, though, which was earlier when you were speaking about the perfect repeatable week, because Celia pointed out that the challenge here is sometimes that business owners get bored and they start changing their focus, and instead of having a perfect repeatable week, you have a mess. So,
Oh my goodness. Pathologically, they do this. By the way, ask me how I know, right? I'm the business owner who pathologically gets bored. My hobby is buying a new business or starting a new business because I can't mess with my existing team because I told them that we're doing perfect repeatable weeks. So they send me off to buy a new company.
I love that. Well, okay, so let's give advice to yourself. So, like, if someone was coming to you and you're saying, Daniel, you're doing it again, mate. You're messing with the business, and you told us we're supposed to be doing perfect repeatable weeks. How do you encourage your CEO to find that consistency? Do you have to go and tell them to buy a new business, or what?
Well, uh, yeah, so the CEO does need to have pushback. You got to remember that a lot of the best founders and CEOs, they really crave feedback from their teams. They don't want to have sycophantic teams who just do whatever they're told. The people that we respect the most are the ones who say, "Do you know what? Boredom is a huge part of success." I learned that from you, Dan. Or,
Mm,
a successful scaling is about boredom. When you're successfully scaling a company, it feels painfully boring. And I'll give you the ultimate example of that is Metallica or Coldplay, or Ed Sheeran. They all talk about the same issue, which is that for you in the audience, you're having the night of your life. For them, this is a repeatable treadmill that they find themselves on for 18 months at a time, where they're doing 2 to 3 cities a week,
mhm,
and it's packed down. move, pack, set up, go on stage, play the same songs, pack the th whole thing down, jump in a bus, go to the next city, and it's actually incredibly boring. And a lot of the destructive behavior that comes from rock stars and all of this sort of stuff is this juxtaposition between the fact that the audience is having the most incredible, unique experience, but for them, this is a boring, repeatable process.
It's so true. I remember a quote, I can't remember where it's from, but it was sort of to the effect of the best politicians out there will be able to say the same story 100 times and it sounds like it's the first time they've said it. And it's the same for comedians and whoever. And like having that
Yeah.
context for our marketing.
By the time you see the Netflix special of the comedian, they've done that show 150 times.
Yeah, 100%. It's so true. Let's do one last bit on the perfect repeatable week because there's a lot of questions coming in the spirit of asking, how do you find your perfect repeatable week? Because I think there's a lot of folks who, and it's the other side of this boredom thing, right? Which is presumably you
Yeah.
need to be experimenting and testing and finding out. And so, how do you get
Exactly. So
started?
the first phase of business when I'm launching something new, new product, new business is the exciting part. So this is the discovery phase. And the discovery step phase is not boring. It's really fun. And what we're trying to discover is essentially four things. We're trying to discover what we call chaos. Chaos stands for what's the concept and how do we describe the concept? Audience is who is this for? Who would find the most value in this? What's the highest value audience for this product? And how do we capture their attention? Offer is how do we explain the offer? How do we get people excited about the offer? What's the price point? What are the features, advantages, and benefits? And then sales strategy. What is our strategy for conversion? How do we do sales? So these first four things that we're trying to do is concept, audience, offer, sales, chaos.
Mhm.
And we're testing, we're measuring, we're like a scientist, we're conducting experiments. For me personally, I'm using the number 30 and I'm using the number 150 a lot. So for example, let's talk to 30 customers and see what they say. Let's talk to 100, let's run an ad and get 150 clicks and see how much it costs per click. Let's get 150 people to hit this landing page and see how many opt in. Let's talk to 130, so let's talk to 30 customers. So um, essentially, I'm conducting these experiments. We have to have something called statistical significance, which is talking to enough people to be able to extrapolate any insights. So 30 people or 150 people, I bounce between those two numbers. So a quick test is let's get 30 samples.
Mhm.
A more advanced test is let's get 150 samples. And, so we're testing concept, we're testing audiences, we're testing offers, and we're testing sales process. Um, Unfortunately, the prize for getting that right is boredom. Once you figure it out, boom, you repeat, 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 repeat. Um,
Which is fabulous. I think it's a lovely reframe on boredom alone. I'm quite happy to have a boring business if it feels. I think there is a lot of comfort that comes from a boring business, which is having results. I think there is a lot of anxiety, conversely, that comes from a business, whether you own it or whether you're part of it, which isn't doing particularly well. And so, like in a sense,
yeah,
boredom
it's.
is lovely.
I wish it was as cut and dry and simple as that.
Mm,
But I've had some businesses that are printing money
mm.
on autopilot, like crank the handle and out pops another 100 grand. And I still sit there and like want to mess with it. I like have a pathological desire to screw it up.
And I think there is something in a lot of founders and entrepreneurs in that. um, I wanna, yeah. Well, we got my co-founder in the chat saying, "Think that might be me, mate." So there we go. Um, so I'll actually want to pick up on that one more time because there's something in this relationship between the sales, marketing, and business, which is when it goes wrong. And was listening to you earlier, and I think I might need to ask you to explain the difference between a reptilian brain and a visionary brain. Um, but I have experienced a case in my marketing profession where I think I went into the reptilian brain mode, which is where I
Hmm.
was sat at my desk and feeling uh, very anxious and sort of acting on fight or flight. And I think when things are
Hmm.
going wrong for some marketers, we can feel a lack of control because we're interacting with someone who potentially is the highest paid person in the room or whatever it may be. And so I wanted to ask you first to explain visionary versus reptile brains so folks watching in can stay in touch with the conversation, but then how one moves from a place of this sort of defensiveness when it comes to how we show up for others into a place where we can actually start to lead them and have more productive relationships with the other departments and so on and so forth. Because I think that human relationship thing is so important to this equation.
Yes, it's really fascinating. My wife got a MRI scan on her head, and we went and saw the results. This was like a week or two ago, and it was actually a cross section of her brain. It was really wild to think that every conversation that I've had with my wife comes from this little bit of mush that we can see on the screen right there. And there's these three very distinct layers to the brain. So there's the brain stem, which is known as the reptilian brain. It's the part that is very similar to all reptiles. Then there's this part of the brain that I call the autopilot, which is essentially running everything on autopilot. You don't have to consciously think about it. The other day I was driving the car and I kind of like had been driving for 15 minutes. And it occurred to me that I couldn't remember anything about the last 15 minutes of driving. I was driving in thick rain, like the rain was pelting down. It's like, how have I actually been driving through the rain for 15 minutes on autopilot while my mind's been wandering? And I haven't crashed into anything. So I've been driving on autopilot. And then there's the visionary part of the brain, which is the neofrontal cortex. It's that big frontal part that folds back on the head. And this is the visionary. This is love, compassion, strategy, chess. It's creativity. It's imagining something that doesn't yet exist. It's empathy. It's all of those wonderful human characteristics. So we essentially we can flick between frequencies in the brain. So if I'm having a reptile mode, I know that no one else would have ever done this, but there are days where I just feel absolutely like out of control, and I feel like, oh, I got too much on. Often for me, if I do one or two too many meetings, I go into reptile mode and I'm cross and I'm attacking my people around me. I'm a little bit bitey. Um, I might be having thoughts of fight, flight, or freeze. Wanting to fight people, wanting to run away. To have hide under the duvet. Any of those kind of things. So that's reptile mode. Autopilot is just repeat the past, and visionary is imagine the future. Imagine a desirable outcome and reverse engineer the future. So it's useful to know which mode we're in. It's useful to say, am I in visionary mode right now? If not, and I'm trying to do something that's visionary, this is not the mode to be in. When a business is scaling, we actually want it to be in autopilot mode. We want people to not have to think too much. We just repeat what's working. But to get to that, we get to that through vision. So we envision a way of achieving that, and then we commit it to autopilot mode while we're scaling. And we want to try and stay at all times away from reptile mode.
And so when you head into reptile mode, as you know, I'm sure that there's folks tuning in who are like been in a toxic environment or whatever. How have you overturned that? And again, I'm speaking about that relationship between those three departments because there often seems to be a tension between business, sales, and marketing where they're almost adversarial. It may not have happened in your businesses, but
Oh
have you
no,
ever?
totally no. Of course. Look, on a serious note, any situation that's high stakes or stressful, you're going to have
Mhm,
reptile moments.
mhm,
Um, the absolute first case, the best case scenario is just purely and simply start with awareness.
mhm,
So awareness is just like I'm in reptile mode, and sometimes you need to just simply say out loud or write down with a pen or say like the words I'm in reptile mode,
mhm,
right? Like just I'm not in the right mode for this. And this is where you say, you might just excuse yourself and just say, I just apologies before we start the meeting. Can I just duck to the bathroom? I'll be back in a few minutes. And just go and have some deep breaths. Go and have a little bit of a move. Reptile mode only really lasts about 6 or 7 minutes. you thrash it out pretty quickly. Go into a second room, throw a vase at the wall, and then don't do that, right? Don't do that. Um,
Yeah, but I appreciate that, because I think the we set out the
can
stall
the
to.
vase be a business expense?
So
Yeah.
Mel is brilliant, and yes, I think it should be. I've sat in moments where I have had that tension between those departments, and I haven't verbalized it. I haven't thrown the proverbial vase against the wall. I haven't done a business expense, as Mel says, and it's caused a rubbish response, and it hasn't caused us to rectify the situation. So I just really appreciate you speaking through that, because that feels like a very practical first step in sort of
Yeah. And
improving these relations.
the cop out response is that when you're in visionary mode, you actually already know all the words to say anyway. So if you're trying to influence a founder and you're in visionary mode, you say, would it be okay if I lock horns with you on your strategy? I've got some experience that I want to bring to the table. And I'm wondering whether you're fixed in your view as to how we execute, or whether you'd be open to me sharing a strategy that I think could be even more powerful to get the outcome that we both want. And those words tend to just naturally come out if you're in visionary mode. And you speak from a place of certainty and high level consciousness, where people in the room pick up on that and they go, "Yeah, okay, it sounds like you've got a good strategy that you want to discuss."
Mhm. There we go. Such a lovely way to approach it as a chat comment. So appreciate that. Right, let's head back to the perfect repeatable week kind of area of things, because it felt like, based on the chat comments and stuff like that, that the community really appreciated that insight. And part of that was sort of testing and figuring out what's going to be working over the next year and stuff like that.
Well, I'll show you a few of my perfect repeatable week campaigns.
Hell yeah, that'll be wicked. Please do.
Yeah, let me show you just a few. These are some of the things that we just have running all the time. Um, so perfect repeatable weeks, intro events. So an introduction event is any event that explains the thing, right? So an introduction event is an introduction to blank. So let's say I ran a gym. I might do an introduction to weight loss for busy professionals, or I might do an introduction to running your first marathon, or I might do an introduction to bulking up and building muscles fast. So basically, it's an introduction to blank. So it's reintroducing or introducing people to the kind of key thing that you need to know about. I often like the idea of introducing people to what I would call upstream insights. Upstream insights are before before you know that you need a thing, there are upstream insights that lead you to know that you need the thing. Um, Let me give you an example. So a guy was asking me the other day about, he's got these cabins that he has in Dorset, and they're these beautiful like retreat cabins, and he was basically saying, "Am I marketing these correctly?" And I said, "Well, actually, you're assuming that people understand the value of disconnecting. You're assuming that people understand that it's a worthwhile thing to do to have some isolation." I said the upstream insights that are needed are probably things like, why would it be good to have isolation? What would that actually do for you? So you might want to do an introduction to increased productivity and creativity, where before someone knows that they want to isolate themselves in a cabin, which is the main premise of the business, they may not have the upstream insight that that's even a good idea. So what is it that they want? Oh, they want creativity and productivity. Great. Let's run an introduction to having more creativity and productivity, where we introduce them to the idea of a self-isolation weekend. And it's like, now we've got a product that's downstream of those insights. So one of the things I love to do is do an introduction to whatever is the upstream insight. It helps make people go from problem aware to solution aware, in a very resistance-free way. So the upstream insight almost always removes resistance around the product. So we call that an introduction event. So I've run a few of these. These are just the ones that I've got sort of like available. So this is like, one about business growth. 13,000 people hit that website, 3,500 entered for that, 27% conversion. And I think we did about £450,000 worth of business off that introduction. This one was for Score App, learn 5 powerful ways to generate high quality leads and get more clients. We repeated that. Actually, that was the screenshot from the beginning of the year, and then we just dropped in 2024 off the back of it. So that was the only major change to the page. 18,000 people hit the page, 6,800 opted in, 39% opt-in rate, and it would have generated an increase of £30,000 a month of recurring revenue just on that one campaign. So these introduction events, that's an example. Another example would be scorecards or assessments. So an online assessment is essentially where people self-assess. You may have seen 5 love languages, Strengths Finder, Myers-Briggs personality indicator. Any of those are self-assessments. These are incredibly powerful. You just run them week in, week out. So this was one of the ones we ran, which is a personal brand assessment. This is where you discover your key person of influence score. So 53,000 people hit that site, 12,000 opted in, 26% opt-in rate, and we would have done about £1.5 million off the back of that particular page. This one was for Score Up. There's a formula for generating leads, a 60-second assessment here, which this was a smaller campaign, 3,800. This was linked to some SEO that we did. 49% opt-in rate, at least 10,000 a month of recurring revenue would have jumped up from that. This is for a book publishing company that I own. So books grow businesses. Here's an interesting one. We added a PS on the bottom of the email, just on everybody's email. So all the employees, all the people who are associated with the business, we added a email signature PS. And we had 1,877 people come through to the website through that. 561 people filled in the assessment, 34% opt-in, and about £500,000 worth of new business came from that. So just adding that as a standard email PS signature. So those are some of the things that would have fit within the perfect repeatable week framework. You could add to that access to a discussion group that is rolling. You could add to that standard discovery sessions or strategy sessions. Those are all things that you'll often find people doing in the perfect repeatable week.
Nice. I love it. And I think the interesting thing is that quite often when we think about it as marketers, we think about awareness, consideration, purchase, retention, and advocacy as a reasonably standard quote unquote funnel. Which, by the way, that shouldn't be assumed knowledge. I think there's a lot of people who haven't been exposed to these things, but the fact you're more consciously sort of putting something which I would consider in the consideration phase as like a really, really crucial part of your overall business strategy and driving people to something which is pre-purchase and really valuing that consideration is something I don't see a lot of people speaking about. Everyone jumps to the purchase, and actually it strikes me that you speaking there about the money, there's probably some modesty there to a certain extent. I don't think you're the person who sort of likes appearing like a flash person, but I think there's also the money is less impressive than actually the conversion at the consideration phase, because that's where all the effort has gone into, which is quite an interesting just sort of marketing theory, marketing implementation. So thank you for speaking through that, because again, really, really refreshing and a nice way for us as marketers to also convey our value. Because if you're driving people to these sort of pre-conversion moments and saying, look, this is what happens as a result, then that's a really great way to communicate your value to the rest of the organization rather than just being on revenue alone, which
Yes.
seems really smart. So I like that. Sorry, I end up going into marketing nerd mode. So
Yeah, no, yeah, no, exactly that. Yeah, great mirroring back.
no, it's great, and you got some fans as well in the chat feature, by the way. So uh, maybe some new customers as well. So Emma says, which tools do you use to build these scorecards and assessments? So
Oh, it's funny you should ask that, Emma. Here's a whole business that I prepared earlier.
I
Uh,
don't. You've been paying.
I planted Emma into the audience to just bring up Score App at all times.
I love it. So, uh, yeah, Emma says, I'm not a stooge, I promise. But good job. And we've got Lucy saying, I have your book as well.
Yeah,
Which,
scorecard marketing explains how to set up those scorecards.
yeah, we had we actually sent about 400 or 500 people to get that book from the Marketing Meetup community the other day. So again, just a really nice implementation at the consideration phase, which I really really like. So it's just great to see this stuff in the wild. We had a comment from Mel who said it's great to see the behind the scenes, the transparency. Mel's actually very willing to go into people's funnels and do it willingly. So that's really really great. Um, let's bring in some community questions because we've spent a lot of time investigating business, sales, and marketing, but I want to make sure the community is heard. So we've got a really great question coming from Baz, who says, and it references something you referenced at the beginning, which is what brands are smashing the supply and demand tension in your mind? And why or how do you think they've achieved that strategic and tactical success in their marketing? And it's always difficult when people ask for examples because the mind
No,
goes blank.
not at all. No, not at all. So the brands that let's go to the ultimate extreme of those brands. So the extreme end of those brands would be Rolex and Ferrari. So Rolex, they never sell you the product; they sell you the waiting list for the product. So what they do is that if you would and actually by all means go in and actually try this out, like just have an experience of what this actually is like. So you go into a Rolex boutique. They'll ask you to if you'd like to try on some watches and which ones you like. And it'll be very much a relationship focused first appointment. They'll ask you if you're registered with any authorized dealers. And if you say no, they'll ask if you want to register with them. So the first part of what Rolex will do is just simply register you as a customer or as a potential customer. And then when you choose a watch that you're interested in, you are not allowed to buy it. What they do is they say that watch is on a waiting list and you'll need to go onto the waiting list and we'll let you know when it's available. So that will typically be a process of waiting for 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. And what they'll do is they'll call you up at around 3 to 6 months and they'll say, Joe, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. The good news is that your watch is in. We've got that available for you, and we can hold that for about 3 days. Unfortunately, we can't hold it for more than 3 days. So if it's not something for you, we will have to sell it to somebody else who wants it. So they build demand and supply tension by selling waiting lists. Now we can also see this with Tesla. Tesla, they launch a car before they even have built the factory. By the time the factory is built, they've got millions of people on the waiting list for the new product. So they've built demand and supply tension into the process. Ferrari is another example. You actually have to buy certain entry-level Ferraris. Believe it or not, there are entry-level Ferraris before they will then allow you the privilege of buying certain special Ferraris. So you have to kind of work your way up as a Ferrari person because they only make about 8,000 cars per year, and they make sure that you're aware that more than 8,000 people per year want one. So they have they make you jump through a few hoops on that. So we see this a lot of the time in luxury. We can also see this in nice restaurants. Restaurants make you join a waiting list or make you pre-book in advance. So anytime that you're creating tension, but here's the other interesting one. Let's just take something super basic like Google Ads. Why do Google Ads become valuable? Well, actually, it's because there's only 3 or 4 ad spots at the top of every search. If you want to be in those 3 or 4, you're going to have to bid your way into that 3 or 4 top search results. So they're selling a very scarce piece of real estate, and they're saying, well, how much are you willing to pay per click? So they're putting that up there, and if you're not willing to pay a certain high premium for the click, then unfortunately you won't be seen. So yeah, those are all examples of demand and supply tension setting a higher price.
Nice. I love that. And how it strikes me when you're speaking about it, and I'm aware that you're cognizant of this because you started with your answer of let's take it to the extreme example. So, but you also precede today's interview by sort of speaking about like growing by relative standards. I mean, it still sounded impressive, but smaller businesses. And
Yeah.
so it strikes me that as a marketer, if I was going to walk away from this session today and say to my boss, look, I think we need to be building a bit more scarcity into what we're doing, that it becomes quite a scary thing to do if you don't already have that existing demand, and we're now going to flip our marketing efforts from a place of please come, please come and buy our services to actually, just wait a bit, join the wait list or whatever it may be. So how do you hold your nerve in that situation?
Well, the first thing too is I want you to mentally replace the word boss with customer.
Hmm.
If you're a marketer, your customer is the company, the boss, right? So we want to think, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, the customer is the boss as well. So think about your boss as your customer. Your customer is trying to achieve an outcome, probably growth, probably profitability, those sorts of things. So you're trying to help your customer get what they want.
Hmm.
Um, and what you're saying is, I've got some opinions and perspectives around how to achieve what you want. You've brought me in because you value my ideas, my perspectives. But with that said, I totally respect your experience. What I would encourage anyone to do is, can we create some little test campaigns that we can run simultaneously to see if we can find a better way that works. So let's not kill off the stuff that works. Let's not, get rid of the marketing strategies that have been tried and tested and that have built the business. Let's just add some micro experimentation around the edges to see if we can find something that could be scalable. So let's try a scorecard. Let's try an assessment. Let's try an introduction event. Let's have a little waiting list for new features and see if people want to jump on the waiting list to be one of the first to have access to new features. So let's do some experimentation for the purposes of collecting useful data about how our customers behave.
Nice. I love that. And it strikes me, I've seen Mel's name in the chat feature today. So Mel's a copywriter. And so a really lovely example for that could be like developing an ebook or uh, a private strategy session or something like that with a waitlist associated with that.
Yeah. And
Which,
remember too, any customer that you're trying to sign up, they need to be warmed up to the purchase. And the boss is just a customer. They need to be warmed up to the purchase as well. So, in many cases, any radical idea, but as a general rule, any radical idea that I want to propose to anyone, I always do it with slides. Slide deck is so important. You're trying to get people to adopt a new way of thinking. Literally, they have to create a new neural pathway in their head. So we want to make that neural pathway creation as easy as possible by taking people through a slide deck that allows them to go, okay, now I see the strategy. I understand what you're trying to achieve here.
wicked. I love it. There's so much clarity that comes from that. So thank you, mate. And we've got Liz in the chat saying framing activity as a science experiment helped me get new things over the line with my CFO and COO. And in the spirit of what you're speaking about, Daniel, but also what Liz is speaking through here, that just seems really exciting. That seems like an exciting thing to do. And like there's, I can imagine that being really fun as much as anything else in a business context. Again, the nerd is coming through, but that feels great. And so Liz is saying it was. So that's
Nice.
really, really good. I want to come back down to that communication thing because I love the idea of taking people on that journey. And when you were on the Diary of a CEO podcast, you spoke through Capstone, which is
Mm.
an acronym that you use for pitching. Now, in the context of the conversation you were having with Stephen Bartlett, you were speaking about using Capstone as a external pitching mechanism. I wanted to ask whether, and we'll of course need to explain what Capstone is, whether you also use this for internal pitching or whether in fact, the slide deck is something that you prefer to use as a methodology for taking
It's
it forward.
absolutely brilliant for internal pitching. So Capstone stands for clarity. What is the idea that I want to explore? Authority. Why am I a good person to be talking about this? And I know that's a strange one when you already hold a position in a company. However, the way the human brain works is that we weight things differently based on relative authority. So, for example, if an office junior walks up to you and says, "Have you ever considered keeping a notepad and pen near you and writing your ideas down and just journaling your ideas?" You might go, "Whatever. Like, why are you telling me that?" Um, if Richard Branson says, "One of the secrets to my success is that I keep a blank journal next to me with a pen and paper, and anytime I have an idea, I write it down and I share that with somebody." Oh, wow, Richard Branson told me that. That must be an amazing idea. So relative authority dictates how much weight we put on things. So clarity and authority. So casting some sort of spell of authority is a useful thing to do before moving on. So clarity, authority, problem solution. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and restating the problem? How am I potentially going to solve that? And then the bigger why is the T. And then opportunity, what we see that leading to, the next steps that I need from you, and then the essence, or leaving on a positive emotion. So we essentially teach our teams to pitch ideas using Capstone: clarity, authority, problem solution, opportunity, next steps, and the essence. Problem solution, the why; opportunity, next steps, and the essence. Um, and um, and that is that's a good way to pitch. Even if you just grabbed half of that and had some sort of pitching structure associated to sharing ideas,
Mhm.
you're going to get a lot further.
I love that, and I think it's one of those things, and maybe this is me speaking through my eyes rather than speaking on behalf of the community, but just having some structure to that ask, to that conversation, takes away some of the chargedness that goes alongside that. Where you could be unsure the right way to phrase it. So thank you for speaking through that, because I find that really useful, and indeed to know that it can be used in the internal sense as well. We've got Paul in the chat saying, "Did anyone manage to note down the entire acronym?" And like at this point, I point out that the recording is available after today's session, so you'll be able to go back and watch that as well. But there you go. You got Nada saying that was very helpful as well. Let's go into a completely left of field question, Daniel, just as we start to bring the session to a close. Because there's a question that comes from Anonymous in the Q&A, which is, what do you see as the major difference between demand generation and generating leads? Which I think a lot of folks would see your success with the perfect repeatable weeks and the tactics that you
Mhm.
spoke about, and not necessarily know the differentiation or understand how it
Yeah.
works.
So imagine there's a factory, and the job of the factory is to manufacture demand. So manufacturing demand. So imagine that what we do is we have people who are not particularly interested in what we do, and out the other end, people who are highly interested and signaling that they're interested. So what's happening inside the factory is demand is the manufacture of demand. What spits out the other end is a signal of high intent. So what a lead is a signal of intention. All right, they're signaling that they have a high degree of intent around a product or a service or an idea, or moving forward, or buying from a company. Right, so a lead is signal of intent. So if we imagine the demand factory that's sitting there, all these people are going in one end, and out the other end they're putting their hand up and saying, "I'm really interested." So that end result is a lead.
Mhm.
Um, and then the demand manufacturing or demand generation is what's happening inside the factory. So there are a lot of things that could happen inside that factory. You could heighten the tension that people feel. So the tension between where they are and where they want to be, if you heighten that tension, that manufactures higher demand. If you heighten the obstacles, the things that get in the way of them getting what they want, that can manufacture a lot of demand. If you clarify the path, that can manufacture a demand. If you share interesting upstream insights, that can manufacture demand. If you increase the level of trust and transparency, where people feel a greater degree of trust, that can help manufacture demand. If you are just clocking up time and interactions with people so that your top of mind awareness is there, that can be one strategy for manufacturing demand. So we have all these things that could be inside the factory that manufactures demand, and that we know that those things are working because out the other end pops leads.
Mhm. Love that. And this may bring us in as we start to close out the session into some of your final slides, because you were speaking about podcasts before we went live today and stuff like that.
Yeah, we
Would
could
this,
finish on that as an idea
yeah,
if you wanted to.
absolutely. If you're game, then these have been things that folks have really appreciated. So I'm sure that would be really lovely.
Yeah, so we were talking about podcasts because going going bigger picture, the United States presidential election is not just a political event, it's actually a marketing campaign event. And even if you had zero political interest whatsoever, you would look at those campaigns and you'd see a lot of interesting marketing information. If you think about politics, or if you think about the US election in particular, US presidential election in particular, as one of the most aggressive winner take all campaigns that happens, it's like the Formula One of marketing. In fact, Kamala just spent $100 million a week for 15 weeks in a row and lost, right? So 1.5 billion was spent on her campaign in a matter of 15 weeks. It's absolutely astronomical to think about that. Imagine a startup business that spent 100 million a week for 15 weeks and then didn't and then closed down. Right, that was it. It just
Mhm.
game over. So it's a really interesting, like cutthroat, phenomenal campaign to take awareness of. So historically, these campaigns, they show us leading trends as to what we should be doing. So in the 1930s, the fireside radio jingle chat with Franklin Roosevelt signaled radio advertising was a big thing to get involved in. 1960, JFK versus Nixon signaled that television had arrived as the major dominant form for building a brand. 2008, Obama everywhere social media campaign, right? He's talking about he's connecting with people on social media. 2016, Cambridge Analytica, data analytics. That was its moment to arrive, that data analytics became very, very important. So the big thing that happened in the 2024 election was podcasts, long form podcasts. And it was reactionary to the frustration that people were feeling in the very noisy media landscape where you couldn't get straight answers from traditional media. So traditional media and social media were being influenced by agendas and algorithms and editing and cutting and AI created content. All this stuff was going on. And the only antidote to that confusion is that people wanted to experience a long form, hard to fake podcast format so that they could actually almost deep dive and hear from the horse's mouth. So it's like, okay, you've heard all these horrible things about this candidate. Well, let's actually see the candidate for 3 hours just talking, and see what they say. Or you've heard all wonderful things about this candidate. Let's actually hear whether they live up to the wonderful things. So the podcast format emerged in this campaign as the critical winner. So let me give you a quick summary of the stats, which is pretty amazing. Um, so Kamala did 5 podcasts. One of them was only 7 minutes. Call Her Daddy was only seven or 8 minutes. 4 million views, 3 hours of total watch time across 5 podcasts. Trump doubled down on podcasts. 14 major podcasts, 124 million views, and 17 hours of watch time. Now that doesn't include JD Vance, who was also crazy active on podcasts. Elon Musk, who went on Joe Rogan as well. So essentially, Kamala's team, even just head to head on candidates, they didn't do very much on the podcasts. But when you kind of look at the extended team, the Trump team did so many more podcasts. It was a major part of their strategy. And that developed a core group of fans, a core group of voters. So one of the things that we will see in the year ahead is that every brand should seriously take consideration around putting the founder, the CEO, or a major player in the organization onto a podcast. You want to build up the podcast pyramid. You want to basically do lots of little podcasts and then get invited onto the bigger ones and then get invited onto the bigger ones again. And you want to be a guest on other people's podcasts. Take that unfiltered content, share it, let people just listen to the long, unfiltered version. Now, the key here as marketers is don't mess with that core filter of that core reason why people want it. So the worst thing you could do with a marketer as a marketer is take the long podcast and just chop it up into 1 minute versions, but
Mm.
not give people access to the long version. If you are going to do short videos, make sure all of them link to the long podcast. Your goal is to create an unfiltered moment where people feel that they can actually spend time with the person as if they're listening in on a conversation that's not filtered.
That. And from a trend perspective, it's just so fascinating to see. There was the reason why I asked that is that in the Q&A there was a question that came from anonymous who asked about the different tactics you part as your perfect repeatable week, but any insights on how you drove folks to those pages. And so it's interesting to me to sort of hear that as a trend, because it strikes me that that will be at least part of the answer.
Yeah, definitely part of it. Being a guest on podcast, social media, joint ventures and partners, ads, SEO, all the usual suspects. All of that stuff only really works when you have fundamental strength in each asset that you create. If you said to me, there's a lot of people say, "Oh, I struggle with generating leads," and I say, let's imagine you had Elon Musk available to give a talk in your city. You've got exclusive rights. He's going to be there. It's going to be live. Do you think you could get 500 people to show up?
Mm.
Yes. How would you do that? Well, I'd go on radio and I'd tell people and I'd run ads and word would spread and I go, great. So if you've got something interesting that's going on, then it's not hard to fill. It's not hard to get people to signal for it. So the key is you need two things. You got to have something of interest, a scorecard, an event, a discussion group people can join. You got to have something that's interesting, and then you've got to have ways of telling people about that thing that's interesting. If either of those things are off, then you won't get the magic spark.
Perfect. Legend. Thank you so much, Daniel. Mate, it's been really, really interesting just to get the insight from a business owner perspective, from someone who has got vast experience in sales, but then also marketing. You've done it all. So thank you very, very much. And thank you, of course, to everyone in the community as well for contributing your comments, your chats, your questions in the Q&A as well. You're all absolute legends. So thank you. I bring today to a close purely on the basis of we've had a lot to digest over this past hour. So say a big thank you to Daniel. Next week, we've got a session all about experiencing the nuance of B2B marketing strategy. So if you're in B2B, then we've got Jade Tambini coming to speak all about B2B marketing strategy and the nuance that exists in there. So hopefully you can make it for that. Big thank you to all of our sponsors: Frontify, Exclaimer, Cambridge Marketing College, Planable, Redgate, ScoreApp and Storyblock. You're all heroes. And with that, we'll come to a close with a big thank you to you, Daniel, for taking the time with us, mate. If you'd like
What a
to connect
pleasure.
with Daniel and say thank you, his QR code is just there. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next week. Take care.